Welcome everyone to today's Irish Landscape Institute webinar, which is on the subject of starting your own landscape practice. Our speaker today is Philip Doran. Philip is a chartered landscape architect leading PJLA practice through a range of projects in both the public and private realm. Philip has started to practice in the last 5 years. He's also a former adjunct professor at UCD's Landscape Architecture undergraduate program and is also undertaking a PhD in UCD, and he currently holds a position of teaching fellow. PJLA's ethos is summed up in a quote from Gunther Vogt, which is, "Our work begins not with a hypothesis to prove, but with a search for the relevant questions." I think a lot of us have taught either in fantasy or perhaps in more real terms of starting our own practice. So it's great to get the practical experience of someone who's actually done it in recent times. So thanks very much to Philip for generously agreeing to give the webinar. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Philip.
So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us for your lunchtime. I would like to start by thanking the ILI for inviting me to do this. And I want to give the statement at the start that this won't be an advertisement for my own firm. I have attended talks before where people say, I'm going to talk about a specific aspect, and actually the whole thing is just them talking about the projects they like, or on this one we had a very nice client and actually there's a funny story behind this. That's not going to help you decide whether starting your own business is for you. So I just want to take you through some of the practical steps or things to consider when starting your own business if you were to venture out. So for the background, that was my notes page. You weren't supposed to see that, but that's how we roll with it here at lunchtime. So it's important to note that I always had a grow for business or running my own business, and that kind of entrepreneurial side. I get a kick out of it. I do enjoy Jagin's Den. And when I was younger, I did an accountancy course, Accounting 101, because I figured it would help me down the line with my businesses that I was hoping to endeavor in, and I failed it. And I went for the resit and I failed that. I could not get my head around profit and loss. And it's very important that I highlight the bits that went wrong for me, the bits that didn't work, because then you say, jeepers, if you're no good with money, if you're no good with numbers, surely you can't run your own practice. Accountancy and being good with money are two different things. So, yeah, here's an image to start off, landscape architectural talk. These are called Scooby-Doo strings. Scooby-Doos, they were a French sort of craft toy in the 1950s. That was their fidget spinners back in the day. And when I was younger, I used to love playing with these. And so I would bring them into school when I was about 9 and 10 years old, and I would make these key rings and I would sell it to the other kids in the class. And I got in trouble for doing that, but I always had a kick out of earning a few quid on the side. And here's my first failure with accountancy at that age. It was 1 for 20p or it was 2 for 50p. Because when I said and the others said it to me, they said, no, you're supposed to give it cheaper for 2. And I said, yeah, but then I'm gonna have to make twice as many and that just takes too long. So I'd rather just sell one at a time. But then what they do is they buy one and just buy another one. So I was always doomed to struggle with the number side, but that doesn't mean that you're not in a position to run your own practice. I am I suppose, a recovering musician, a drummer. I played drums and taught them right the way through college. It's how I sort of got by and spent my summers doing it. And with that, I moved into cutting grass. I was just cutting grass and hedges, and I formed Lawn and Order Landscaping, and that was landscape contracting. And the tagline was "Fill your garden." Do you get a PHIL? See, when it's on Zoom, you don't hear the laughter, so it can be a bit disconcerting. So, special branch, Law and Order, and I was going around doing that. And I figured that if I went to UCD and studied landscape architecture, I could continue as a landscape contractor. And that was the only intention. Things changed, of course, and then I moved more seriously into actual landscape. So I worked with Durafoli landscape architects, and then there was a grow for me to just move out on my own. So when you're considering starting your own landscape practice, where should you start? Well, it's important for me to say what got you here won't get you there. So not all readers are leaders, but all leaders read. And that's a really important statement, I think, because whether you're looking to move back into education or you're looking to level up in your own business, you need to be consuming books. And then you say, well, I struggle to read. There's audiobooks now. There's really no excuse for getting information into you. And it's about swapping out the landscape architecture books for other business books or psychology books, sales books. Never split the differences here large, because for me it was a game changer. And I think that it's important to highlight that these are there. If you are an avid landscape architect and you love your job, and if you go into work and you love Photoshop or putting together planting plans, you love certain aspects of design, then you should definitely go and get a job. Because when you run your own business, you do less and less of that work. And I did a start your own business course before I set up Philip J. Landscape Architecture. And the biggest takeaway that I took from it is that I need an accountant, of course, because I had failed that bleeding previously, but also you spend 50% of the time in the business and you spend 50% of the time on the business. Now, when you're an employee, you spend 100% of the time in the business. You go in, you have your projects, they are complex, there's different aspects to them, of course, but you are 100% in the business. The 50% on the business is the bit that people struggle with when they start. And actually, when you start, it's really 30% in the business, 70% on the business, drumming it up. And that could be social media, it could be going to meetings, it could be networking. And we need to become more au fait very quickly about the ins and outs of doing business. So some other numbers that you need to consider: 13.5% versus 23%. As landscape architects, our project could fall in now as landscape, I mean, it always falls into the 23% when we're providing professional landscape architectural services. However, the 13.5% kicks in if you're doing a design build. So we need to know that. Sole trader versus limited company. What will you start out as? I started, as most people do, as a sole trader. It's very simple. You can start trading immediately. It's cheaper. You have to set up a limited company. There's a few other obligations. So why bother going into a limited company? And I wanted to throw in this slide before we move on, because it's important for me that why you might go into a limited company is because there's an obligation for you to do so because of the industry we're in. There are clients who would prefer to work with a limited company rather than a sole trader, because a limited company obviously is more established and it just appears less risky than going with some person. I was going to say some lad, but with some person who's on their own. Now, of course, you can be a sole trader who employs people, but I just wanted to give those two slides in there of things to note as examples of spending time on the business. What is the percentage? What's your VAT? And then what are you registering as? There are two T's which I would like to bring to your attention. So when I was first approached about doing this for Mark in November, I had a think, and over the Christmas break, these two T's came to me as being pertinent for being in business. The first is, and some people might turn away at the look of these images, trypophobia is the fear of small holes, gaps, or small clusters together. This can be quite off-putting or disconcerting for some people. Trypophobia, I think it's a strange phobia to have, but it's out there. As a business owner, you need to become trypophobic. You need to be looking out for where the holes are, because a lot of holes clustered together are showing up gaps, and we need to be more conscious of that. So become trypophobic. The second is thigmotropism, which is a living organism's response to touch. And different living organisms, insects, plants, all have different thigmotropic levels in terms of how well or negatively they respond to touch. A business is a contact sport. You'll hear that said in a few kind of salesy type courses and things. But business is a contact sport. You need to be going out and meeting people. If you just want to be in your bedroom generating beautiful rendered images or carrying out LVIAs and you're not really into the interaction part, it's going to be very difficult for you to drum up business. It's not impossible, but it will be difficult because people want to see who you are, shake your hand, actually be in meetings, even if it's Zoom. You have to show up to the meetings with your camera on with some sort of fancy background so that you're standing in and up for yourself. One of the things that has greatly positively impacted my business has been BNI, Business Networking International. It's very similar to a Chamber of Commerce, which is BNI is a group of professionals that meet once a week, and it's a referral network of if you're struggling with some aspect of your business. I don't necessarily get a lot of business worthwhile from BNI itself, but the connections that I make and the advice that you get from accountants or solicitors, it's a really good building block. And it also helps when you're standing up and speaking to people or having to introduce yourself to people. So I wanted to give BNI a shout out. So clients, the different types and what to be anticipating. Family, friends, and current clients. And when I say current clients here, I mean you are in a practice at the moment, or you are working with other people and you're working on a project with a group of architects, with a developer, with a group of stakeholders. And then you think, jeepers, I could probably do this myself since I'm leading the project. I will cut and run. Or you say, I have a parent, an aunt, an uncle, a sibling who is in a particular field, quantity surveying, architecture, engineering, and you say, what if I were to cut and run that way? Because there would be my start. Where are you getting your first piece of business from? Well, I think it's important to note, people believe they get what they pay for. People believe they get what they pay for. And this is, I suppose, you might think, if I set up and I work from home and I don't have many overheads and I'm a single person, I'm a sole trader, and I'm only getting going, I don't have all these overheads, I can undercut the competition. Yes and no, but mainly no. But yes, you could do that. But not only are you damaging landscape architecture as a profession, because then everybody is in a race to the bottom. And the problem, as Seth Godin says, with the race to the bottom is you might win. The other thing is that when it actually comes to proper projects, they will always go back to the more reliable firms, the more reliable studios or other designers. Practical example of this, and I was just thinking this last weekend, Aldi and Marks and Spencer's. People know people, or maybe you do it yourself, who will shop in Aldi all year, and when it comes to the Christmas shop, they say, well, no, it's Christmas time, so we're going to go to Marks and Spencer's, we're going to do it properly, because they believe they get what they pay for. It's more expensive, so they say, that's the fancy time of year, we're having people around, so we're just going to go that extra bit. They don't shop in Marks and Spencer's all year, but when it comes down to it. And the landscape architecture version of this is, you are working with a developer or with an architect, and they have a problem site, or they have something that they need to get over the line for a commencement, or they have an FI, or they're going in for planning, and they just need, and that's all they need. And can you come in with this? And listen, Philip, if you take care of us, we'd really appreciate it. We won't forget it. The problem is, if the fee for that should have been 6,000 and you charge 600, when an actual project comes around and they're developing a public open space or a green, or there's a redesign of a school or some historical quarter in a city, they don't go back to you. They go to the proper landscape architects who are established, because they say, well, we believe we get what we pay for. They don't tell you that, but they say, no, we can't risk it going with the €600 person. We have to make sure that this bit gets done right. And that hasn't happened to me per se, but I know of another person who is in graphic design that happened to. They were working with a tech company, and they were doing all of their website, their logo, all of this, that, and the other. And then they came with a rebrand and a new launch campaign. And the person was gutted. They couldn't believe that they had gone with a bigger, more established, and they said, oh, there was no loyalty there. I gave them everything. I could have done the redesign. You couldn't really have given them the redesign, because all you did was chat about the discount stuff, and they will always see you as a discount player. Here's a great statement from Nassim Taleb. I'm a big fan of his books, Anti-Fragile and The Black Swan. Highly recommend reading them. People don't go with the best option, they go with the least risky option. You might think this is saying what I just said in the last one. Here's another story that I'd just like to go through, which was a friend of mine, a very good friend, is in a very well-known, established, large engineering firm. And I set up the practice in 2018. Well, for the tax purposes, I set up in 2019. So, but from 2018, I was there. And when COVID hit, it was coming towards the end of 2020. And I was speaking to him, and I said to him, what would it take to put me on your bid tenders when you're doing your e-tenders, or when you're working with local authorities? What would it take to put me on, rather than the cred that you're using at the moment? And I know the cred that they're using, and there was nothing wrong with them. And what he said to me was, a very good friend of mine said, look, we have their CVs. We've done projects with them before. It's just easier this way. I could say to my bosses, but they'd be looking for, why is it this person? And of course, if it's just a case of insurances, all of that can be bought or trade, can be brought or subbed in. But the actual relationship, even though I was a friend of his and I was saying, what would it take to get me that bit of work? His thing was like, it's just too risky. Why we don't go with the best option, we go with the least risky option. We've all seen terrible designs done by large practices, and you go, how do they get away with that? Because they have 20, 30 years experience. So then you say, well, how do we get around that? James Clear, Atomic Habits. Most of you have probably heard of it, and I'd recommend signing up to his Thursday email, 321 email. It's great. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. And I'm changing that for today's ILI chat. Every project you take is a vote for the type of landscape architect you wish to become. So if you take the projects where you're coloring in the green between the buildings, and you are Johnny Landscapes at gmail.com, they send it to you, you color it in for a few grand, and you send it back. Those are the types of projects that you will continue to get. You won't ever evolve from that. A huge kind of struggle for me was breaking out of the private residential market. If you continue to do private residential gardens, you are seen as the garden designer. Nothing wrong with garden design, but you won't be taken on for public projects. It's a different beast. It's a different way of thinking and designing, as we know as landscape architects. But it's very hard to turn down those other projects. But it is so important to do so, because like that, for the friend that I was just speaking about, who was going with this other larger landscape architecture firm that they had continued to do work with, what he had seen was my work on social media. I'm wrapping up now, don't worry. So just in case this is getting on a bit, I started by saying, if these other practices have 25, 35, 40 years experience on me, why would an architecture firm or a developer opt for me instead of them? Because they go with the best, they go with the least risky option, not the best option. So I started with 101 days of plants, and every single day from the start of spring on Instagram, I posted about local plants. I wasn't showing it was plants that were in flower. They were at that time, and I would speak about their background and their history. What I was showing was I am competent. I know what I'm talking about when it comes to plant design. So I am not a risky option. Then I moved on to after the 101 days, I did a tree series called Dendrophobia. Dendrophobia is the fear of trees, and I was speaking about different aspects of trees. I was not showing a hazel tree and saying, yeah, Cornus ambulanna. And the thing about Cornus ambulanna is it has these feet, blah, blah, blah. It was nothing to do with the actual features of identifying the tree. There's enough of that online. I was talking about, did you know, fun facts, referencing the books that I was getting it from, or some experiences that I had that had led to thought processes about trees. And again, I was just speaking about the living nature and how that comes to be. I met an old friend, a landscape architect, and this was in 2022. And I met an old friend, and we were chatting, and he said, "What are you up to now?" And I said, "Landscape architecture. Yeah, I'm still doing the PJLA, Philip J. Landscape Architecture thing. It's going well, have work. I'm not able to keep up with the videos because I'm so busy, but I suppose that's a good complaint to have, LOL." And what he said was, and he wasn't having a dig. I don't think he was having a dig. What he said was, "Oh, I thought you were in forestry. I thought you were doing something with trees, that you were moving away from design." Okay, no, that's all right. And it was a throwaway comment, but it stuck with me because the type of, every project you take is a vote for the type of landscape architect you want to become. This is a person who follows me on social media, who knew me from college. They weren't in the same year, but they knew me from UCD. It's a small cohort that we have in terms of landscape architects in Ireland. And for them not to know, or maybe he was having a dig now that I think back on it, but for him not to know it or to think that, I thought, right, I need to stop with the trees. And so I then did a series on the design process that we go through. And this was not for clicks or likes. Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is, will tell you to have it in 30-second bursts, to have camera angles change and to do a funny dance at the end. But in actual fact, this was for other professions, so that if an architecture firm were to say, we have this project, we need to engage with landscape architect, but everybody's so busy at the moment, which is a fact, then they'd say, well, actually, there's this person online, they seem like they're well able to do it, or that they would be we'd be in safe hands with them. And so that's where I've been going with this. So I wanted to tell you these steps very honestly, and also talk about the failings, not just from an accounting point of view or from the drumming point of view, but also from this idea of being open and honest and saying, what would it take to be put onto your tender documents? And the engineer saying, we're going to go with these other people. What can you bring? What is your UPS? You might be in a position to offer arboricultural, I will struggle to say that, services. So you can do tree surveys along with your landscape design, and that's what would give you the edge because you're the full package. You can go and record the trees, etc. Or maybe it's LVIA, which is growing. One of the largest growing sectors within landscape is going to be this idea of large scale flood defense, energy production in the landscape, but also migration or immigrant housing and even just housing of people. So how does all that fit in? And if you can have the edge and you are online or releasing a blog, you don't have to put your face in front of the camera. But if you're speaking about this in an open way, people start to see you as the person to go to for those issues. But just be careful what you wish for because you might get it. So if you're going to keep talking about garden design or about your favorite flowers, and then people say, "Oh, I have a problem with my apple tree. And do you know what species of anemone this is?" And you go, "That's not what I want to be taught." Yeah, but you're the one that put up the 101 days of plants. So what do you expect? So all of this can be found on cheeky little plug here, Mark. Sorry, philipj.landarch.com. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks a million, Philip. Um, I'd invite anyone who wants to ask a question to put it into the chat there, and I'll start with one of my own, which is, I suppose before the talk, Philip, I would have maybe in my own head thought that the financial aspect was kind of more important, but you're talking up the marketing and meeting people and getting yourself out there. Would you say they're equally important, or do you think that I suppose the business, the accounting and the likes of insurances and that's straightforward or done by others, that the marketing is more important?
Not an Apple user, but I will quote Steve Jobs. He said, you hire people that are better than you and you ask them what to do. And engaging other firms in terms of a bookkeeper. I think a bookkeeper is essential. And also having somebody with the insurances, getting that in and explaining what your business is or what you're looking to do, it pays for itself 10 times over. So it's a very small risk to take. And they're not actually, they almost act as if they're in your business because you can refer to them, but they're not on your payroll, so to speak. But you do obviously have to pay them. So I would fully, I was doing my own bookkeeping. I always had an accountant, but I was doing my own bookkeeping. And it's important to keep your finger on the pulse to see the comings and goings financially, but it could be a massive time suck. I found that handing it over to a bookkeeper has been a game changer for me because I can focus on my business. I used to also at the start, um, because of my contracting background, I'm very familiar with a spade. And so when I was starting out on some of the smaller projects, I'd say, I'll just do the planting. And what I found was that that would actually impact on people's view of me in terms of the weight that I carried. And depending on how you dress or how you hold yourself, how you speak, people have biases or make assumptions. And so I stopped doing that because I realized that they would say, yeah, give us the design for free or, discount design. And sure, yeah, you'll be doing the planting anyway. So I think it's about focusing on the work that you want because the finances can come after. It's very difficult to figure out how to cost things or how to price things appropriately. But I suppose I didn't want to get too much into that because there could be some um, other ways of thinking about it or people's other circumstances. But I would strongly advise against undercharging because you think you're doing yourself a favor, but it's hurting the industry as a whole because then we're just the gardeners that color in the green, but also you're not valued. So I would just focus on getting your name out there in terms of marketing and meeting with others.
Thanks. A question from Louise, which is about the insurances. Did you struggle with this topic?
Struggle. Did
I
I
think,
struggle? As into
could you tell us the types of insurances that are essential?
so there's
It's
public liability, there's
yeah,
professional indemnity, and there's employer uh, um,
liability, yeah.
uh, employer liability, employee liability, that's only applicable if you have employees. But no, there was no struggle. It's a part of being in business. You just have to do it, and that's the way that I see a lot of things. But even uh, I have an office, and even when I was on my own and it was just me in the business, I would still have the office because it's important to have an address that people say, oh, that's not a bedroom. Psychologically, because of where I'm looking to take the business, that was important for me. Other people would say that's a waste of money. Keep your overhead small. You should absolutely keep your overhead small, but at a certain point, you have to invest in yourself. So I didn't struggle with the insurances. They are what they are. And
Mm.
I suppose I was
And
just focusing on getting the work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so there's the three insurances you mentioned there, and it's just a question of contacting insurance brokers to put them in place, and obviously that comes at a premium. Is that correct?
Yes, and I suppose just to plug it again, the BNI, because I found it to be hugely beneficial, or if you go to any business development or chamber of commerce, there are people there who will help you. So I was able to contact different insurance brokers through the BNI and actually have a chat with them and see. So there was a lot of the pain was lifted. The same with the bookkeeping. I was able to just rely on and just go with. And if you spend all your time trying to say, yeah, but is there a cheaper bookkeeper or can I get cheaper insurance? You're nickel and diming while the dollars are flying overhead, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
just to say as well about the employer liability, I didn't mention this because it's for people starting business. So don't worry about employees for the moment. But there is this sort of anti-fragile phenomenon that Nassim Taleb, second time mentioning him, speaks about. When you take on a second person, if your turnover when you're self-employed is 200,000, you take on a second person, your turnover will not be 400,000. It will either be a million or 100,000. It will be an extreme. You know, you either lose a lot because you're investing in that person and you have to get the employer's liability and you have to set them up and like da 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 da, or it dramatically increases. But it's not that it just doubles. And I suppose the most practical example, if you're in a landscape contracting game, if you have a second person with you, if you're doing it on your own, you get 100 units of work done. If you have a second person with you, you can get 300 units, whatever that might be, done. It's actually worth three people to have a second person, just in terms of time and psychologically, and then bringing expertise. So it's about bringing that on. But I just wanted to say that when I was just mentioning the employer's liability.
yeah. A question from Joe then. Hi, Philip. You mentioned you had a hard time breaking out of the residential market. How did you break into getting public realm work?
Um, I suppose applying for tenders and making it known as well that you are into the commercial. What I stopped doing was posting the residential projects to social media, and I stopped talking about them pretty much altogether. I mean, we have some which would be like private residential. We're engaged at the moment with the British Embassy. And so, where the ambassador lives up in Glencairn, Leopardstown area, there's a project happening there, which will be seen as private residential, but actually it's more like commercial with all the goings on of it and the amount of tender and back and forth that's happening. So, but the biggest thing was doing the videos on social media and speaking in the language or speaking to engineers and architects and aiming it to that, not aiming or not speaking about private or to homeowners. I had an opportunity to work with a very big influencer, a well-known person who has, I don't know how many million followers and a podcast and everything. And they reached out and said, hi, Philip, would you be interested in doing my garden? And then I could promote you and I'd be happy to, blah, blah, blah. And I rejected that because um, it would only have brought people that it would only have brought business that I was not looking for. And then you say, yeah, but commercial work isn't always there, and there's a recession on the way, and da 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 da. So there's all these reasons why you should take on all that work, but actually, you need to at some point make that cut and say, this is me now. I don't do those things anymore, even though we still do those things, but I don't advertise it, if that makes sense.
That does. I have a question there from Thomas, which is probably as much for me as it is for you. Thanks so much for sharing your experiences since starting up on your own. I started on my own last year, so great to know there are others out there. I feel a big problem in Ireland is the lack of awareness of landscape architecture and clients using engineers instead. Is more being
Yes.
done to raise awareness of the profession?
Yes, yeah, yeah, it's a really good point. Yeah, I still have family members. I think I'm a landscaper, like a landscape contractor cutting grass. Um, I don't know what's, yeah, I suppose, Mark, I'll leave you answer that, but I think that the interest is being picked up. What I have seen in my short time is a dramatic increase. It's come from local authorities. The
Mm,
councils are now saying, please engage with a suitably qualified, chartered, registered landscape designer to provide a better use of public open space or to give better accuracy in terms of tree planting. And I have had architects, engineers contact me and say, is this something you do? Are you one of these lads? They say that, I mean, we did something, we thought it was fine. It's just parking. It's a big parking area. I don't know why they're suddenly getting antsy about the trees, but is that something you could help with? So it's actually, for me, the biggest improvement and what I've seen change is local authorities uh,
yeah.
demanding a level up from those. But
It,
Mark,
it
if you
it's
wanted to,
Yeah, it's very often a condition of planning permissions that a landscape architect will have to sign off on the landscape proposals. So particularly for bigger projects like all the commercial developers would be very well aware of landscape architect services and would be conditioned to use them, but they'd be well aware. I think it's maybe the public who would be less aware. I think
yes,
g generally architects and engineers, developers are all quite well aware. But yeah, we were obviously we have the awards coming up this year, which is our flagship event to raise awareness for the profession and the work that we do. So to encourage everyone to engage with that, and we'll be looking to publicize it as far and wide as possible. Another question there, Philip. Hi, Philip. Great webinar. Do you find there are more opportunities? This is from Kevin, opening up for smaller practices with local authorities, given the volume of work being tendered at the moment. And a follow-up, do you prefer to work with return clients or take risk with new ones?
so the first part of the question is, sorry, just
About
repeat because I
local
jumped onto the phone.
authorities, and I might just come in there as well. I suppose when you're talking about local authorities work, you're into tendering, which is quite, I suppose, different from just being asked to price a job and then being awarded the job. The bigger the job with a local authority, you'll have to fill out a certain amount of paperwork. You have to register as a supplier with the local authority to begin with, and then go through the whatever tendering process is for the job, which differs depending on the value of the job. But I'll let you answer then whether smaller practices get a look in with local authorities.
Yes, I believe so. And I think that there is so much work out there. And then they say, oh, but with everything that's happening globally, there's recession on the way. But for the time being, I think there is absolutely more opportunity. And actually, I have seen that there are certain practices that want the smaller outfits because when they go to the bigger dogs that have 20, 30 staff, they speak to somebody on the first day, they sign the contract, and then they're handed over to a juniors doing the work, or they find it hard to get them on the phone, or their attention is split. So there is an opportunity there for the smaller firms to come in and up. One of the, I suppose, and this goes back to Joe's comment about how do you get out of um, the private and move into that. I was doing a favor for an architect, and they asked me then afterwards that they had a friend who was looking for some advice on a tree in their garden, and I spoke to the person, and they I don't want to be giving too much away now of identity because there's a lot of people in this room, but they only afterwards told me that they were themselves a retiring architect and that they had worked on some very, very significant large projects in Ireland. And I didn't realize, but they were with one of the big four, blah, 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 and they'd moved around. So they were retiring now, and I hadn't realized that. So we were just having this informal chat about planting about space. And sure, this person knew it all, of course, but I suppose just was feeling a bit lonely, wanted to chat. And um, He was actually the one that said to me, I should have said this to Joe earlier. He was the one that said to me, I was on your website and you're more garden design and landscape architecture. And I said, well, that's how it starts. And he said, that's not how it starts. He said, you need to be getting out there and speaking about landscape architecture in public open space and even doing mock projects, doing competitions, filling out e-tenders, constantly just having your oar in the fire or your rod in the pond to be seeing what comes up. And he said, I've worked with landscape architects for years, and sometimes the issue can be that they are waiting until the design of the architect is fully finished, and then they will come in and they will try to move things around. And in actual fact, there's an opportunity there for there are architecture firms that want design-led landscape architects, or they want somebody who has plant knowledge or has knowledge of trees. I keep referring back to plants because that's the kind of aspect that I enjoy of it. But whatever aspect you're into within landscape architecture with that LVIA, there are counterparts looking for those services, but they just don't get them. And if you're able to offer that in a kind of uncorrupted way because you can focus your time and energy on it, then there are, I suppose, opportunities for it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So
I
there's, I
finished that.
suppose,
And then the
two
second
elements.
part of the question,
Well, just before we get on to that,
sorry,
I suppose I just say there's two elements. So one is the making sure you're a registered supplier and registering for
yes.
e-tenders as well and getting in. But the other is local authorities are made up of people, and as you say, Philip, it's about marketing yourself. Go into events where people who work in local authorities also go to, such as ILI events. Obviously, I'll plug, but you'll find they're at Cultural Association events, all the UCD end of year show, all those kind of trade events is where you'll meet the people as well, and get to have the chat, put yourself on the map. And the second half then of Kevin's question is, do you prefer to work with return clients or take risk with new ones?
Yes.
Both.
It's always such a kick and a lift to get the return clients. There's nothing like it because they trust you. You know, there's visibility, credibility, and then profitability. And so the visibility is they see who you are. Credibility is you can deliver, and then comes the profitability. So for them to come back is always brilliant. And if they come back and it wasn't a positive experience because they were too controlling, they didn't let you do what you wanted to do, then you say we're not in a position to take on the project at this time. But I'm always chancing it with new clients as well because there's just so many doors. But I see sort of business in general as a game. And I don't know if anybody knows Diablo, which was an old game on the PC from the 90s, but there was you were a lad going around a dungeon and you had to free the princess, whatever it was. But in order to free her, you had to slay the dragon, or it was kind of a big butcher lad. But to kill the butcher, you had to get the knife. To get the knife from the blacksmith, you first had to do a quest for him. And so this kind of gamification, um, I don't know if that means that I'm a bit, but just that idea of gamification of that's how I see business. It's all leading from one thing to another. So I'm open to it. Another thing, just to touch on what Mark said there about having the reputation and being registered. We were on a project with a local authority. It was based outside Dublin, and as part of the FI, we had to engage with an arborist to do an arboricultural report. And when I went to the pre-meeting to say, look, this is what we're at, this is what we're after, is this acceptable? Before we submit it, do you need us to change anything? And the person who was in engineering, but they were sort of very pro landscape in terms of greening and biodiversity, da 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 da. They saw the name on the report and they said, that report isn't worth anything. You're going to have to get somebody else. We've seen his work, and that person is completely led by the developer. They will say whatever the developer wants them to say. So the developer says, look, make sure that you give that a U and give that a C because we need to get those out because that's where we're going to get the views. We need to get in extra houses. This person had lost their reputation. They weren't able to stand up for themselves because they had already um, shown that actually they were just there on the side of the developer. So just to touch on what Mark was saying there, it's people in the council and they see the names. And if you go in and you have a reputation, they go, oh, this lad again, he's just going to be going wishy-washy. And look at this, the same plant list, he doesn't know anything about it. So I think that's important to note.
Thanks. One more question, and we'll make this one the last because I'm conscious of time, which is from Thomas, and it's how important is a website?
The link, you just get that, yeah. I can just
No.
blame Zoom for breaking up because I stuttered. I wasn't sure where to start. And LinkedIn is, for me, the most important. It's a living business card. And when an engineer gets in touch with me, the first thing I do is look them up on LinkedIn to see the practice, what their background is. And um, I think that LinkedIn is the living business card. It's where professionals do business. But if you don't have a website, it seems a bit strange. You can be a bit flighty. And if you don't have a website, well, I actually think your email is more important psychologically. If you're Davey88 at yahoo.com, it's just not reliable. And the website gives you a sort of permanence. Even if you register a website and say under construction or a website and you say, we provide design solutions for the construction and development industry, and you have a picture of your desk. Don't take a stock photo, but a picture of your desk. Oh, this is human, right? Yeah, there's something there. The larger clients all still check websites. I think that it is important, but in terms of having a high definition, super fancy website, for me, it hasn't been. It's the same as a business card, but I think LinkedIn is more important. But from LinkedIn, they'll go and check your website.
Yeah, thanks. I would say on the website as well, having the business address and the people who are working with you, if any, it would be something that an employer will look for. Um,
Yes.
that's super. Philip, thank you so much for generously giving your time to bring us up to speed there, and hopefully we'll see new practices co coming on stream over the next few years. Um, uh, our
Definitely.
next
That, I mean, sorry. Yeah, I was just
one,
going to say that that's another way to get the name of landscape architecture out there is for more firms to establish and be just doing work under the banner of landscape architecture. Sorry to cut you across your mark. I'm just excited.
yeah, I was just going to advertise our next webinar, which is on the 29th of February on the topic of tree law. So it's a lunchtime webinar again. And thank you to Anne and Hazel for running the technical side of things. And we'll talk to you all again. Thanks again, Philip.